So I would like to thank all of you for joining us, and really extend a special thanks to the NSCDA Rhode Island for joining us with such enthusiasm. We're really excited about this program. We're also looking forward to really exploring more Charleston, Rhode Island connections, perhaps in future Second Cup conversation programs. And just one last bit of advertising before we get started. Our next Second Cup conversation is November 11th, and we continue in New England when we go to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, to visit the Moffett Ladd House and Gardens. So I hope that y'all will be able to join us for that. But I'm going to introduce Joan and then turn it over to her. Joan Bartram is the Museum Properties Chair of the Rhode Island Society. She has led this committee for 3 years as the Society works to bring the best practices in museum management to our two American treasures, Whitehall in Middletown and the Stephen Hopkins House in Providence. Joan was a collections development librarian and library administrator for 3 decades. She has graduate and undergraduate degrees from the University of Rhode Island. In addition, she has a certificate in preservation management from Rutgers University and in drawing and painting from the Rhode Island School of Design. She has long been interested in preservation, dating back to many museum visits with her family and through attendance at national and state preservation workshops. Mrs. Bartram developed an appreciation for Charleston through attending multiple library conferences at the College of Charleston, where her favorite conference activity was wandering the streets south of Broad each afternoon when she was visiting. She became a dame after serving as textile consultant at Whitehall and becoming enamored of the beautiful light streaming into the bishop's study. She is a real Rhode Islander, being a Green and Coggeshall descendant. So, Joan, thank you so much for undertaking this and sharing your expertise.
Good morning and welcome to Whitehall. As you heard, this is one of our two American treasures here in Rhode Island. Whitehall is located in Middletown, Rhode Island, and we'll show you that on a map in a minute. Whitehall was created by the Right Reverend George Berkeley, an Anglo-Irish clergyman, born in Ireland, educated at Trinity College, Dublin. He became ordained as an Anglican priest, and he went on to Europe with as a secretary and chaplain and visited France and Italy, which had a profound effect on his future life and development. Berkeley was a well-known theologian and philosopher. His philosophy, to sum his philosophy up in one sentence, he is the person who said, if a tree falls in the forest, do you hear it? By the 1720s, he had reached the peak of his career as a philosopher, and he was kind of a rock star. But he was a rock star that was looking around for a new project. And he became more and more, there's Berkeley, sorry. He became more and more enamored with the idea of going to the New World and creating something there. So in the late 1720s, he conceived the idea of founding a college to be called St. Paul's in Bermuda. And his main goal was to educate the colonial young men who did not have the means to go to England to be educated, and also to educate Native Americans. He eventually applied for a charter. The king seemed to approve of the idea of this college and was going to fund it with the remains of sales of land in Nevis and St. Kitts. In 1728, Berkeley married Anne Forster. He married late in life. He married a woman who was very well educated, very well connected. Her father had been Speaker of the Irish Commons and a Chief Justice. They married in August of 1728, and several months later began on their great North American adventure. This is a typical Baroque portrait group that was painted by John Smibert. It's known as the Bermuda Group, and it is currently located in the art gallery at Yale. Smibert is the person on my left of the photo. Next to him is all right, next to him is John Wainwright, who was a patron. Richard Dalton who was behind Mrs. Barkley, was the architect and art. He was going to teach at the school as well. Then we have Barkley in his clerical robes and teaching and preaching tabs. In the front row, we have the patron. The woman in the yellow holding the baby is Mrs. Barkley with Henry. Now, Henry was actually born in Newport when the Barkleys got here, but he was inserted into the portrait by Smibert. And the woman in the blue dress, Miss Hancock, was Mrs. Barkley's companion here in America. Smibert actually remained in this country, became one of the first portrait painters in the colony, and also had one of the very first art supply stores in Boston. So Barkley arrived with his people in 1729, and the Newport that he arrived at was a little bit different than you might have imagined. In 1729, Newport was on the cusp, the brink of its great golden age, which would extend to the revolution in 1770. However, when Barkley came, the only major colonial monument that was in place was Trinity Church. The Brick Market, Redwood Library, Colony House, and Truro Synagogue were built maybe 20 years later. So the Barkleys came to a town with a burgeoning coastal trade, which made certain sense if you wanted to go to Bermuda. Barkley had at this point decided that he needed a farm to grow crops and produce for this college, because Bermuda was, even in his time, barren and has always had a water problem. When he first came to Newport, he became friendly with James Honeyman, who was the rector of Trinity Church and a missionary from the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. Honeyman owned a farm in Middletown, and if you look on this map where the blue arrow is, you can see where the farm that Honeyman owned was located. Barkley bought the 96-acre farm next to Honeyman. And here we have Trinity Church. Trinity was added onto in 1760, but it essentially looked like this when Barkley arrived. And here we have Honeyman. Now, the land that Barkley bought had been originally owned by the Narragansett tribe. And the entire Aquidneck Island was purchased. We are on an island, and the entire island was purchased for 40 fathoms of wampum, 20 hoes, 10 coats, and 5 additional wampum for the local sachem. The first colonial owner that we know about was Joseph Whipple. He was the deputy governor of the state, and his second wife, Sarah Redwood, was the daughter of Abraham Redwood. They had 10 children, and she obviously was from very important Newport family. This was not their primary residence. A lot of the merchants that lived in downtown Newport with limited land did own farms out here in the countryside to provide them with produce as well as income. This is the house that Barkley conceived. One of the important things about it, looking at it from the front, is the doorway, the pedimented doorway. It's believed to be one of the first classical facades built in this country. The doorway, we'll talk a little bit more about later, is kind of a trick of the eye, as is the chimney. The central chimney is, if you notice, off center, but if you were riding up to the house from the 3-mile ride from Newport, it looked right on target. Now, when you look at the side of the house, and this is a later photograph, you'll notice that it's essentially in 2 parts. What Berkeley bought was a 4-room, 2 up, 2 down farmhouse, and he added to it. And there are 2 theories as to whether he added to the front or to the back. And we are still looking into this and hope to have somebody come back next summer to take another look. You can make up your own mind. Now, Berkeley did not move into the suburban locale that we're seated in now. He moved into a rural landscape, and from the house, the Berkeleys could see to the water. Aquidneck Island, where we're located, is the end of a terminal moraine, and this means we have some wonderful rock formations here. The one in the top of the picture, Hanging Rock, which looks sort of like a crocodile, has an opening in it. And there is a tradition that Berkeley wrote a book while he was in America called the Elsiferan. And there is a tradition that he sat, we have a little engraving of him sitting at his 17th century table in his 17th century chair in this opening in the rock. Yeah. Purgatory Chasm is down the road from here, and it's one of those things people try to jump all the time. Now, the house, the Berkeleys stayed in the house for 3 years, and they had ups and downs. First of all, Mrs. Berkeley lost a child and then had another child who was sickly. Berkeley came with a great deal of enthusiasm. George I was going to give him a charter. He was going to have 20,000 pounds. He was going to have this college in Bermuda, and all was going to be well. And Bermuda is sort of not that far from here, and it all might have worked. As time went on, he became discouraged. Nothing was happening in Parliament. He had been in great favor at Trinity when he first came, and he spoke from the pulpit every Sunday for 3 months. As time went on, his views diverged from those of the congregation, and he became less popular. He did do some other things we'll talk about, but things weren't as good as expected. So in 1732, the family thought about began to make preparations to leave. Now, one of the things he did do here, and I'm going to talk about this because the slide seems to be missing, was he created a philosophical and literary society. This was of great excitement to the men in the colony. They met often to debate and read and discuss what they worked, had a very impressive list of ministers, teachers, politicians, and interestingly enough, merchants who were just beginning to prosper. Now, the merchants in Newport that were the first group of prosperous people were Quakers, and they were naturally involved in this wanting to learn. This literary society outlived Berkeley, and it became the Redwood Library and Athenaeum, which is still in existence today. This is the Redwood Library building designed and built in the 1760s. Now, one of the things that Berkeley wanted to do when he was here was to make contact with the Indians. And he did this not on Aquidneck Island, but across the bay, which was it's now 2 bridges, then it was 2 ferries. He met up with Dr. James McSparran, who was another charismatic, larger-than-life missionary from the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, and the rector of St. Paul's Church, or the old Narragansett Church in Wickford. And McSparran did introduce Berkeley to some Indians. So he did get to see what the Native American population was really like. And these were the people he wanted to serve. Now, what happened to Whitehall after Berkeley left is really interesting. One of the things that I believe leads to the preservation of houses is awareness of them and continue awareness. Now, Whitehall continued as a farm, but the first thing that happened to it when it was still in good condition was it was an inn. And we have a letter from 1744 written by Dr. Alexander Hamilton, who made a tour of the coast of North America and commented on staying here. One of the more ambitious proprietors of the Whitehall lease, and I should say that when Berkeley left in 1732, in addition to leaving his books, most of them to Yale, a few to Harvard, he turned over the lease for the property to Yale. And this lease funded scholarships. It's no longer a lease, but the funds are probably still there to help students. So the farm, Yale became the owner of the farm, and they were in a different landlord. So there began a rotation of tenants. And one of the great entrepreneurial ones was Abigail Stoneman, who took over the lease. And in 1769, she moved to Whitehall and opened it as a pleasure garden for only the finest men. After Abigail went off to Boston for greater things. And then the house became a farm. It became a farmhouse. Newport prospered and flourished during the period between 1730 and the beginning of the Revolutionary War. It was one of the 5 largest cities in America. It was actually had one of the biggest ports. It did in that time prosper through the triangular trade, and the effects of it can still be seen in the city with the great colonial monuments. The Whitehall tenancy fell to a man named Silas Cook. Now, Newport's downfall in the fall in the Revolution was the British came and they occupied the island, and this just did as in. Whitehall was taken over by the British officers, and it was used to house Hessian troops who had no respect. The troops throughout the island had no respect for the land. And by the time the war was over, there were no trees. Most of the houses had lost their clapboards and some of their flooring, because in the last couple of years of the occupation, people were literally burning up their house. Whitehall survived because it had been occupied, but probably not very well. So after the Revolution, the lease went to a family called Brown, and they held it for most of the 19th century. This is an idealized picture of the house. It probably never quite looked like this, but you get the idea. It continued as a farm. Whitehall's located in an area called Paradise Valley, which was a lovely, it still is a beautiful place that goes from marshes to woodlands with good soil. And it was potato country until it started to grow suburban houses. Now, but as the 19th century went on, the farmers became poorer. Rhode Island is not really a great farming area, and the soil started to give out, and people just didn't have the funds to keep things up. And so by the 1860s, 70s, Whitehall was in bad shape. It had one more brush with fame that I don't unfortunately have a picture of. In 1874, Charles Follop McKim sent a photographer named James Stillman around the island to take pictures of various colonial structures that had caught his eye. McKim was hanging around in Newport. He'd married somebody from Philadelphia, and there was a great summer connection between Philadelphia and Newport. So the cat slide roof, our famous cat slide roof, became an inspiration for the colonial revival, but it was a very tired inspiration. This is the east or garden side of the house, and this is the west. And one of the things we know is that the great vine that you can see in this picture was crawling inside the house. The floors, the windows, the walls were gone. And so it was in quite sad shape. In 1897, the hue and cry went up to try and rescue the house. And for $3,000, it was rescued by 3 women here in Newport: Mrs. William Binney, Mrs. Theodore Kane Gibbs, and Mrs. E. Livingston Mason. They did this on their own. And as it says here, the roof was broken, falling down, floors were rotted, great vine, but they did get the funds to buy out the lease for the remaining 700 years. They then proceeded to have the house restored. This is kind of partially through the restoration. Now you'll notice here the horse and buggy. One of the things that Whitehall had been all through the 18th and 19th century was the destination for people, and people from Newport driving out, walking out, coming in their carriages to visit Paradise Valley. And this is a great picture of the house when it was in transition from farmhouse to the state it's in now. So here is, again, we saw this picture before, when the house was restored in 1899 to 1900. It was painted with a typical colonial revival with white windows and white, picking out the details on the side of the house. In 1900, we should note, is this when the colonial dames entered the picture? Mrs. Mason was a founding member of the colonial dames. And so in 1900, Whitehall was turned over by the dames, the Rhode Island Society, to the Rhode Island Society to be open to the public. The ladies felt that because the dames were an organization, they could support the house better than individual people. They opened with no fees were charged. Now, these are some pictures of the restoration, and we'll go back and talk about this in detail. This is from the original restoration, and this is the point at which they were tearing the house apart. One thing we need to note about the men in this picture that worked on the house, they are carpenters that had probably spent their entire working life working on colonial structures, shoring them up, tearing them down, converting them. If you were to walk through Newport in the 1900s or 1920s, these lovely colonial mansions would have stores in the front and people lived in the back. And these are the men that did this work. The important thing is they worked with these materials all this time. And now if we need to have work done on Whitehall, we have to find specially trained preservation carpenters. So that was this is what the kitchen fireplace looked like in 1899. The remarkable thing is it's still standing. We have a central chimney, and we have another cooking fireplace in the basement. And this was the front of the house at the time it was restored. The gardens and the landscape have been through tremendous changes over the years. This is the best we could do with our very favorite photograph. In 1900, Edward Everett Hale came and gave a speech to open the house to the public. In the left-hand corner of this, you can see liveried coachmen. Everybody that came to this event whether, except for those that lived in Newport, had to take a ferry or a steamship to get here. Because just like when Berkeley came in 1729, in 1900, there were no bridges to the island. So this was quite a gathering. We're sorry the picture isn't better. I got stuck. I don't know what happened. Oh. Okay, so no, that's about right. Yeah. So the Danes have been the holders of Whitehall since 1900. Talk a little bit about our relationship and then tell you about the restoration. In the 1970s, the Society worked with Yale and purchased the balance of the 999-year lease so that we now own the house. We own the free and clear from Yale. Yale was probably very happy to get rid of us. They owned at one time, many farms, and they just washed their hands of them. 1970s, we bought some acreage so that we went from owning half an acre to the 9 acres we own now. One of our first things we did was in 1974, we built a parking lot. Then in 1986, we got public water. Up to that point, we'd only had a well. Very minimal electricity and very simple plumbing. So as time has gone on, we've been able to modernize the house and make it comfortable to live in. So now I'm going to go back and show you a little bit of what the house looks like. Again, this is our fake double door. The double door was an important element of 18th century architecture, and Berkeley compromised. One half of this door opens and the other half is a sham. But this shows the symmetry, the facade, and the front hall is important. This is a very tiny, very simple space. There is no stairwell. You do not walk into this house and go up a grand set of stairs. When Berkeley lived here, the stairs were located in the kitchen. We'll show you where, and we do now have a staircase which comes into the story later on. Now you'll notice the date on the furniture. The Berkeleys brought their furniture with them, all their goods and chattel, and they took it home with them. Okay, this is the, I'm gonna come back to that. All right, I'm going to show you the way the house was restored. Yep, no, that's right, actually, sorry. In the 1930s, so we'll go through this chronologically because it's kind of interesting. One of the things that the Danes did was to always select the very best people they could find to work on the house. But the stairwell was not native to the house. Prior to the 1936 restoration that we'll talk about, a Mrs. McCagg, who lived in Newport, discovered this stairwell in a house that was being remodeled or taken apart or demolished. And she made arrangements for it to come to Whitehall. This, to me, the stairwell represents a certain thinking about preservation in which the object, even if you can't save the house, you save the object. And this stairwell was typical of the houses built in Newport prior to the Revolutionary War. Now in 1936, Rhode Island celebrated its tercentenary. And in order to celebrate the 300 years of the state's existence, this Rhode Island Society engaged a man named Norman Isham to restore the front 2 rooms of the house. This is the parlor. He restored the parlor and the bishop's study. Now the parlor, if you'll notice the fireplace and the on the wall, you can see framed pictures of tiles. The tiles are important. They were found in the fireplace, and they've been identified as Irish tiles, and they may be the only remnants of the Barclays in the house. So this is the parlor. This is shows you one view of it with a chaise. We have one interpretation of the house where we talk about this being Mrs. Barclay's room. And then we go across to the bishop's study. We call this the bishop's study. We like to imagine this is where the bishop worked. And I should say, Berkeley was not a bishop while he was here. He became a bishop when he returned to Ireland. The fireplace in here, which again has delft tiles. And then in the corner of the maps, we have on the walls, we're trying to tell the story of Berkeley and his travels in Europe. And there are also maps of Bermuda in this room. In the 1950s,
just like ours.
What's known as the bishop's bedroom was restored. And this has interesting paneling and again, a fireplace surrounded tiles. In the bedroom, we have a four-poster, and you'll notice the crewel work curtains. They were actually made by a member of the Rhode Island Society as a memorial to her mother. She made the two that you see and then was not able to finish the project. But they, not only are they beautiful, but they also represent what American crewel work looked like in the 1960s. The kitchen, which you saw several pages back, was restored in 1950 and then again in the 1970s. And during that period, up until that time, the kitchen was probably not part of a tour because we found a note the other day that said they moved the modern appliances out of the kitchen. So now we have a beautifully restored kitchen. And again, this is the other view of the kitchen. And over here on the right, on the left rather, where you see a door, is probably where the original staircase was located. The fireplace, we have a closet in here with a collection of artifacts. We often use this talking to school children. We have shoes that were hidden in the house. And at one point in time, we had ice skates. So where are we with Whitehall today? We are a gathering place. We still gather here. This happens to be a luncheon that we had when Anna Duff came to visit Rhode Island. And this was for the entire Rhode Island Society. One of our big traditions at Whitehall is to celebrate Flag Day. And we always do this in conjunction with the Newport Artillery Company. And in this particular photograph, the artillery members are escorting a woman who was a veteran. We had given her a grant for patriotic services. Now, one of our important relationships is with the International Barclay Society. And the most important, one of the most unique things about Whitehall is our residential scholars program. And I have asked Hope Alexander to tell you about this program. And Hope is coming. She's sitting upstairs. Our house is divided in two parts. The downstairs is the museum, and the upstairs is a residential apartment and library. And we're waiting for this. I'm going to let her tell you about this program because she's the person that's overseen it now for a number of years. And I think Hope is coming downstairs. We have a very
switching over to a new person, and I don't know what happened.
So, participants, I think we're just sort of waiting for the speakers to switch over. Speakers, let us know if you can hear us, because I think we may have lost your sound. Oops. Okay, it looks like we may have lost our connection with the folks. I think their screen has gone out. Tina, do you have their information that you could try and get them back?
You need a phone number or something?
I think Tina has the information. Ms. Roby, do you have a telephone number that would?
Yeah, I can give you Betsy.
Okay.
Let me see if I can do the share screen. Let's see. I think she's probably the best bet.
Kim, can you hear me? This is Jeannie.
Yeah, I can hear you, Jeannie. Oh, well, you're there with them, aren't you?
I'm at Whitehall, so I'll take you into Hope.
Yeah, we can't hear Hope at all.
I'm not sure that they may have lost their Zoom connection as well, and they need to.
Hi.
Once-
Hello.
Hello, is
Okay.
this the telephone number
Y-
ending 151?
They can hear me. So do you want to use
This-
my?
This is hello. This is Betsy Hyman, and we have lost our Zoom
So I
connection.
talked to them.
Okay.
They could hear me.
They probably don't
And
have
so
good internet.
I'll just,
Here's Ken. There's hope.
there's hope. So now
Introducing
see
Hope
you and-
Alexander.
hear you.
Okay.
I can't see whether or not you can see me or hear me. Can you hear me?
Who's talking?
Oh, this is Hope Alexander.
Yes, we can hear, I can hear you.
I can see
I can
you.
see you as well.
Can you turn this up a little bit?
Are you on iPhone Gene?
The mother. You're thinking
Yeah.
motherhood.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know where we lost you. Did you hear any of what I was saying before?
Nothing.
No, we did not hear. We were
No.
waiting for you to tell us about the residential program, the philosopher in residence program. So
Okay.
I don't think we got any of that.
Okay. Well, since the 1970s, we have had resident philosophers living on the second floor, and we have a wonderful library, which I had hoped to show you upstairs, which they use for their work. And there are 2 bedrooms also. These philosophers or scholars are found for us by the International Barclay Society, which is mostly made up of members who are scholars, academics, who have some interest in either early modern philosophy or George Berkeley in particular. And it's really a wonderful situation for us because they keep the house open to visitors and they provide a really lovely international academic perspective for visitors. And it works wonderfully for them because they get to be here from a week to 3 weeks, living in the house, becoming imbued with Berkeley's spirit through the house. And they have a lot of quiet time to do their work, their reading and their writing. We have a wonderful library of all of Berkeley's works and all the works about Berkeley. It's very important for us because this house is the theme here is sort of super intellectual, and it's not one that many Danes are particularly interested in, or even the local community. So having the International Barclay Society support us in finding a community for this house, which is really quite academic, is terrific. It also means that they bring us a wide perspective that we might not get otherwise. We have scholars who range from a young Polish academic who came 2 years ago, 7 months pregnant with a 2-year-old and a husband, to such luminaries as Michael Ipgrave, Bishop of Lichfield, who is an OBE, who was awarded an OBE for his work in interfaith relations. So it's a really interesting group of people. And they are helping us to figure out where we go next with this house, what its future is going to be, and even who we are as Danes, especially in relationship to Whitehall. So it's very unique in that way. And I would love to turn it back over to Joan for closing remarks.
Good morning. Do we have any questions?
This is Tina. I had a couple of questions. I'll just do them. why did, maybe I missed this, but why did he come to Newport rather than go directly to Bermuda if they're establishing the college in Bermuda?
It was hard to get to Bermuda,
Okay.
unless you were shipwrecked. Newport, there was a regular coastal trade between Newport and the West Indies. So it was just a very convenient place for him to come.
Okay.
He had also, on his way here, been to visit College of William and Mary.
Mhm.
So he was doing sort of a tour, but it was, he needed to have materials and things to take to Bermuda, and this was just a good place to ship them from.
And then again, they didn't ever think of establishing the college in Newport.
Well, they actually, he talked about it towards the end of his stay here, and
Mhm.
it didn't have the support that the having a college in Bermuda had, because Bermuda would have drawn from the entire coast. And I think even then the British government was getting rested about the colonies
Mhm.
and what was going on there. And
Mhm.
so while he thought about it, it had no support.
Okay. Okay. And I was interested to read on the website that a lot of us are not familiar with Bishop Berkeley, but I was really interested to learn that the Divinity School at Yale is named for him, as well as University of California at Berkeley,
Yes.
which has a tremendous academic reputation. So he is remembered here academically. Does anybody have any questions from our audience? Actually, this is more of a back of the house question. The kitchen would have been in that sloping back.
Yes, the
section of
kitchen
the
is
house?
the sloping part of the house.
Okay.
We had hoped to give you a tour and it didn't work out.
Right,
But
right.
yeah, the kitchen, it basically takes up most of the slope.
Okay. Okay. And what kind of programming do you do now? I know with COVID, things have been upended for everybody, but it sounds like you were doing school groups and.
No, not what
Well, not-
we've been most fortunate during COVID. It's a blessing and a curse that we don't have a paid staff. So it meant that we've been able to subsist for the last 2 years with our endowments. And we have taken the time to examine our houses. We started with Whitehall, and we did an inventory and an interior site survey. And we're now moving on to do that at Stephen Hopkins. And we also had the opportunity to meet and talk about our programming and about our future. And we are still working on redesigning our programming. We will still have the philosophers, that's who we are, but we're also looking at revising our interpretation. So at the moment, the programming is still kind of up in the air, except we do hope to have the scholars back next summer.
It's a beautiful space. The house is beautiful.
All right, we're going to see if we can give you a quick walkthrough.
Hi, folks. I'm going to try to flip the camera. Hold on. I'm afraid it didn't work.
It did for a second, Betsy, when you first did it.
Nope, it's not working now. I'll do it this way. Are we ready?
Yeah, sort of.
Is it working?
Not quite like that.
Yes, and we can see the parlor. And that's all the parlor there. So this is the front of the house right there.
Now we will go through the hallway, to the bishop's bedroom.
First floor, yeah.
The four-poster bed with the crewel curtains that Mrs. Rowe handmade in memory of her mother.
That's a lovely thing.
Familiar with colonial houses, we've all seen these scenes. A tea chest in 3 parts here, and as I progress through,
We did have a question about whether there are any original pieces or original to the house.
what we think, the only thing that is original to the house is the Delft tiles. We think those Dutch tiles that Joan showed you were back in the bishop's study. But this house has been restored so many times. We think there might be some floorboards that were original to the property, but we're not sure. I'm going to take you into the keeping room, the kitchen, which we've shown you several different restoration levels. Hold on, down the hallway into the kitchen. Fireplace. We have quite an inventory of artifacts, but most of this has been donated by people over the years, by many different members. They are period correct for the most part, but then there are things that aren't. And again, into the closet.
Was that originally a closet, or would it have been part of an oven, or?
This is part of Isham's restoration.
Okay.
So we're not sure. That's one of those pieces that we need to investigate. And one of the wonderful things that we have up here on the shelf are what are called concealment shoes that were found in the wall space. And they're a tradition for good luck, something to ward off evil spirits. They belong to somebody who lived in this house at some point in time.
Interesting.
I'm going to back out.
Here's a question. Has there been any excavation work on the property? So any archaeology, have you all been able to do any archaeology?
I'm going to hand that question back to Joan. Has there been any archaeological?
We had some archaeological work done here, probably 10 years ago now. Students from Salve Regina University here in Newport dug in the farmyard. They did not find artifacts that went back to Berkeley. They found shards and related artifacts from the late 18th and early 19th century. There were extensive outbuildings here that are gone, and they probably found one of the dumps.
This is a great connection between Charleston and Rhode Island. One of the professors from the Salve Regina Historic Preservation Program is now here in Charleston, John Marcoux, who is a wonderful archaeologist and does really great projects. So I'm sorry you don't have him anymore. I'm very glad that we do. But I'm sure that he was probably part of that dig.
No, he wasn't. It
No,
was his
okay.
predecessor.
Oh, okay. Robert Russell, was that?
No, it was before him.
Even before him. Okay. Well, they have a great program. So
Yeah.
I'm so glad that y'all have the chance to interact with them. Another thing, you know, it's funny, I think in New England and in Europe, kind of everywhere, especially England, has this tradition of concealed objects, especially shoes. And there's been a lot of writing on them. Archaeologists and architectural historians, we don't seem to have that tradition in South Carolina, but I've been pestering every contractor that I know. Have you found any shoes? Have you found any objects? And sometimes it's a sort of a spiritual practice. They seem like they don't, you never get a matching set. You get one shoe. And
We actually have 3.
Mm-hmm.
And they, we had a program on this a few months ago, and the interpretation from that program was it was basically spiritual.
Mm-hmm. And there's
but they did find 3 here. We don't know when they're from. I mean, there's been so much work done on the house that we can't really tell.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a fun thing, and people are always fascinated by it.
Well, as a clothing object, one of the things that I read that kind of rang true to me was that, you know, shoes are used for, you know, for on the getaway car of weddings, and shoes are very tied to people, because in this period anyway, the shoe really conformed to the wearer of the shoe.
Yeah.
It's like you could really kind of pass the shoe down because the shoe kind of conform to the person, and that imprint of the person's body is sort of left in the shoe. So do you leave something spiritual in the shoe?
Yeah.
So really fascinating. I'm so glad we all have those. Please let us know if you do that program again. I think that would be
We will.
wonderful to see. I guess that's about it for us. Tina, did you have, I know you've got to probably sign off here. Did you have any other questions?
I do not, but I would like to thank Joan and Hope and all of their colleagues for showing us Whitehall. This has been fascinating, and really would love to know how y'all are moving forward and reinterpreting Whitehall. That's a wonderful site, and I'm in New England just about every summer, so again, this will go on my bucket list too.
Oh, we stop by and see us
next summer. And then I have lots of things that I'm kind of thinking about between Charleston and Newport too, but I save those for another day.
Yeah.
So, but thank you very much for undertaking this, and we're very happy so many of you were able to join us. Hopefully we'll be back together in some capacity in January when we're looking at the synagogues in Newport and Charleston.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's been a nice experience for all of us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Y'all take care.
everyone.